Donald Trump lost that massive fraud case to New York Attorney General James. Now he faces staggering costs, not only from losing the fraud case, as I'm about to walk through with you, but losing a lot of other cases that are piling up. That news hit like a freight train.
It is a big number. It is a staggering number. In fact, it is a record number.
Judge Arthur Engoron deciding that Donald Trump is liable for $350+ million.
This is a major gut punch, as we all well know, to Donald Trump, to his legacy.
To even say it's a body blow may be an understatement.
The court has done everything short of ordering that Trump be thrown into a wood chipper.
This is really a decision that will cause a lot of pain.
You can see the consequences there and the wide coverage Friday on all the channels, including Fox. The baseline number over 300 million, but with the interest over 450 million for these fraud fines. The costly penalty for Trump, though, is entirely foreseeable. Donald Trump has long done business on the edge or over it, on the line or over it, however you want to put it. He has clearly, repeatedly broken ethical and legal rules, and he profits as he goes and then just waits around to see what, if any, consequences there are. Now, let me tell you this up front. Donald Trump has to pay up or appeal within this 30-day deadline. If he appeals, as he knows himself from past losses, he still has to put up huge sums of money. He has to set aside the money amount that he owes now, or get a bond for it, or put up properties as collateral. That's how it works for everybody in our legal system. Now, that huge loss on Friday is a much larger penalty than most businesses ever pay, or ever find ever, okay? Public, private, you name it. For Trump, it's actually worse than it looked during that bruising news day, and I'm going to show you why right now in our top story. His many losses and costs are piling up. The first Carroll defamation suit, that loss cost him $5 million. He's already been forced to set aside that money, as I'll explain in a moment. The second larger loss over more defamation against her led to that whopping $83 million penalty. His many civil and criminal cases are costly to defend. Trump has stiffed lawyers. That's not working anymore. So many of the lawyers that you see working for him now and recently, they're requiring payments up front to even start the job. So back to our breakdown chart. Last year alone, Trump had a whopping $50 million in legal fees. Now, some of those he was able to pass off to his super PAC. Then there are these other nicks and cuts for other legal losses. Just about under $500,000 to the New York Times for a losing effort to sue them. About $1 million for a suit against Clinton that was so empty it was deemed legally frivolous. Another $100K for refusing to comply with a subpoena and getting dinged for that. So you take it all together and now look at this. Friday's whopping loss. $355 million for that fraud penalty. And then with numbers that large, the interest on the fraud fine adds up every day until paid. So that animates up. You see, this is a lot. This is a lot of colors and a lot of costs to another $100 million in fraud interest payments. Together, the recent losses hit $600 million. This is well over $500 million when you take it all together. And what we reported on Friday was just part of the chart you're looking at. When you look at it all together, as you can see, this is ominous for anyone as a matter of business. And if your business is tied to who you are personally, then as a matter of your life and your wealth, or lack thereof, for the long-term future. Now, even though that's a lot of money, you might have heard people, even non-MAGA people, kind of try to minimize some of this. Maybe you've heard this over the weekend as people react to the news. Some people suggest maybe he won't have to pay for it all, or it's not that much to Donald Trump. Well, let me tell you tonight, we work with the evidence. I've heard those claims myself from different people. The evidence we have suggests those kind of claims are false. This is a ton of money to him because he's not so rich that he can just toss off half a B or a B here and there. Now, there are people like, say, Elon Musk, who could do that because for Elon Musk, even $1 billion is still a small fraction of his total worth. The evidence shows that's not the case for Donald Trump right now. This man, now punished severely for habitual fraud, according to New York State, has used spin and rhetorical fraud to make people, even some of his critics, actually fall into those talking points I mentioned, fall into the habit of mind of wrongly thinking he has more than he does. So I'll show you the evidence first. Donald Trump does not have enough cash around to even cover this fine, let alone the other costs that I mentioned stacking up. When forced to account for his cash, the bluster fades. It turns out Trump has under $300 million on hand in cash. And I told you we deal in evidence. That's according to his own recent financial statement, what he put forward. And if he owes over $500 million and counting, how does that impact his net worth? Again, a long way from Elon. Trump has about roughly $2 billion. Okay, that's according to the New York prosecutors who studied his books to win this case, who had the better side of the argument, who won according to the independent judge, as well as other assessments, as the AP reports you see right there. So by those numbers, Trump's punishment and related costs are actually now taking out roughly a quarter of his net worth and counting. Now, about the other piece of the conventional wisdom that, well, Trump gets away with everything, almost everything he wants to. Somehow he outruns every penalty, quote unquote. I'm putting that in scare quotes. Well, remember, I'm going to be very direct about this. When you hear that, whether you hear someone say it or someone post it on the internet, you got to remember something. A lot of people are just talking. They're not doing research. They're not checking the evidence. They don't call around to ask experts or check the legal rules before they say things like that. So you can hear it 5 times, and it doesn't make it any more valid than if you heard it once, none, or 100 times. It's not based on anything. So you might hear people say, well, Trump isn't even paying these fees. Well, in reality, there's a legal process. Losing defendants who don't pay can just have their bank accounts frozen, their property seized. That's an even worse and more extreme measure, which is used. And then take the earlier fine I mentioned in that list for the defamation loss. The first one, we can report for you that money has already left Donald Trump's accounts. So if you heard someone talk about this, maybe they don't know that. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they don't follow the facts. But I can show you here. He already was forced to put it in a trust, meaning the money left his accounts. It's held by his law firm under the standard rules during an appeal. And that alone is over $5 million he parted with. Politico noting Trump would likely have to sell something, although it wouldn't necessarily have to be property. He can sell investments or other assets during all this, as clearly the costs are outstripping what he has on hand. And all of this comes on top of the various criminal trials that Trump is now bracing for.
The first ever criminal trial of a former U.S. president.
A New York judge deciding Trump's hush money payment trial will go ahead as scheduled.
The judge in this case has signed off on March 25th.
Trump's co-defendants in the Georgia election conspiracy case are trying to get Fulton County DA Fani Willis thrown off this case.
Fani Willis not mincing words on the witness stand.
Jack Smith has asked the Supreme Court to reject Donald Trump's effort to delay his criminal trial.
In terms of when we'll hear from the Supreme Court, the answer to that is any time.
So I started tonight reviewing all of the assorted fiscal, financial problems for Trump from largely the civil side. There's only 2 types of law in America. Don't let it get too complicated. There's civil. That's the lawsuits you usually hear about. That's people suing people for the most part, and they usually sue for money. And then there's criminal. That's only the government can do that. That's prosecutors saying you did something so serious that money wouldn't handle it. It's not going to be dealt with that way, that you could end up in jail or prison. So as Trump loses money in those civil cases, including that massive fraud judgment that ended the week, we also have just learned a lot more about these criminal trials, rulings that have reshaped the plan as it was set even a few months ago. So we've drawn this up for you before. With the fraud trial ending Friday, we have now insight into what's left. That trial's now over as of Friday. Now, many had expected those federal trials to go first. The New York DA even said he'd wait and schedule around them. But I can tell you, again, following how this is actually going, not predictions, we now know, based on just what's happened in the last week or so, that Trump's first criminal trial will be the New York hush money case. And it starts next month on the 25th. It's the only criminal trial that is now confirmed to definitely begin before the election. That Georgia RICO case had the proposed August trial date, but it's not likely to hold. The case is complicated now by those allegations of misconduct by DA Willis. In that busy week, I mentioned the fraud trial ended Friday. Thursday and Friday was the hearings for that. Willis took the stand near the end of the week defending herself. All of that's taking more time. And then while Jack Smith for the DOJ has won 2 rounds, beating Trump twice on that immunity issue, that case is now already slated to run later than the New York hush money case. It could be April, May, or far later if the Supreme Court slows it down by intervening. There's also the federal Florida case, which we don't even get into right now, but when you put it all together, what you can see in the new calendar is the predictions don't take you so far. The original prediction was federal cases first. But now, as you can see, the green confirmed case is the New York case. And the other cases, the DOJ coup trial on appeal, could come sooner or later. We just don't know. So if you take it together, what have we learned over the course of just the last week? Well, it's very expensive to be Donald Trump and try to defend all of these different civil cases when basically, what are you left with? About a quarter of your net worth going out the door and a lot of cases left. And if we move off this calendar, I showed you that just for the criminal trials. But if we move off the calendar, what we're seeing writ large is a much more serious set of tangible and measurable pieces of accountability. The money is one piece, the legal costs are another, and the criminal trials are another. And so I do the news. I hear from people. I've heard from a lot of people saying, why does this take so long? Why aren't the consequences more serious? And I get the question. But we are reaching a point where when you follow the evidence, what's actually happening is something looking like not the reverse, but going the other direction of that. The fees are piling up. It's affecting the bottom line. He's barred from doing business in New York for a while, as are his children. He has several criminal trials that he faces. One is now scheduled. The other could still also happen before November. This is not a movie. This is not a novel. This is not some neat and easy narrative that has to be resolved a certain way. And he is, in those criminal cases, still presumed innocent unless the government carries its burden of proof. But the accountability in measurable and costly ways is coming down the pike. And we start this week with a heck of a lot more information about how that's going to work than how we started last week. That's forward motion for the legal system. Republicans struggling since they've been winning back the House narrowly in their original midterms. Remember all the votes it took to get McCarthy in the job? And then that weakness was soon exploited to oust him for Mike Johnson, an unknown MAGA speaker who now showed his weakness in failing on that high-profile impeachment vote, and Republicans now losing another seat in the Santos special election that Carville mentioned, taking up that vacancy. So do congressional Republicans today know how bad it is? That may sound like a rhetorical question, but the answer for many is yes. One House Republican lamenting, this place, the way the Republicans run it, this place is so broken, explaining a headline that 3 powerful Republican committee chairs are now leaving Congress. And the big jobs that polls literally spend decades trying to get, they're just done. Outie. It's part of a wider exodus of 20 Republican members who are leaving rather than running for re-election this year. The GOP retirement retreat may reflect a range of factors, but some of it's tied to the dysfunction I just mentioned and those local losses, and the Santos seat, which Republicans, remember, had won by 7 even in the red fizzle midterm. That win now reverberating from the political press to Donald Trump's remaining GOP rival for the nomination.
Republicans' grip on the House just got even weaker.
Big day apparently for Democrats.
Nikki Haley's campaign also reacted, writing, "Let's just say the quiet part out loud. Donald Trump continues to be a huge weight against Republican candidates."
This race was centered on immigration and the economy, much like the issues all across our country.
Democrat leaning into domestic policy and arguing the party could toughen border security while also still honoring human rights. So here is Democrat, now Congressman Suozzi, basically flipping this issue of immigration and Trump's hold over his party on his Republican opponent at their key debate.
They were so close to getting this deal done, and then President Trump, former President Trump, came in and said, I don't want you to give a victory to Biden. We finally have a chance to have a solution, and we're not going to do it because President Trump said it will help Biden. And the idea that you're not for the bipartisan deal when you say you're so concerned about the border.
Some eyeing that approach as a kind of a model for Democrats this year, noting how the policy agenda was actually a lot more tailored towards voters' daily concerns than, say, the significant but admittedly sometimes abstract discussion of democracy and the rule of law and the most important election ever, which some D.C. Democrats and some of the Biden campaign officials sometimes seem to be emphasizing. Now, the caveat is, of course, it's one special election in one idiosyncratic congressional district held on a snow day, as Politico put it. It is the first House result of a presidential election year. It's not the last. And both parties have long watched special elections as a kind of indicator. And that's just the House. You look beyond Congress, and there's one key state to any Biden coalition, Pennsylvania, where Democrats just had another big win. They've been cleaning up in special elections since the Supreme Court overturned Roe, winning victories in governor's races and ballot initiatives, decisive wins and large turnout wherever choice seems to be on the ballot, including in swing states like Michigan and red states like Ohio, Kansas, and Kentucky, as you can see just some examples there post-Roe. So there are some tough wins for Republicans, both on the ground and in the congressional races, and that's why the best indicator of this is not what the parties say or the spin, but that tonight so many Republicans are just retiring rather than running again for a House race, House seat, while Trump is on the ballot, likely, if he wins the nomination. None of that will predict how our obscure, odd, antiquated electoral college will go in November, and none of it cancels out the deep skepticism for both parties' top candidates right now. If you get out of politics land and out of D.C., you can check the polling, the data, or just talk to anybody in any normal place, and you will find what we've told you, that most people want other options. Rarely do we head into a race where majorities say they prefer other options for both likely nominees of the parties. But that's where we are, and depending on what the parties do, we might very likely have a presidential race with Biden and Trump as the nominees. So you take it all together, and you can't say that Democrats doing well on the ground means their Democratic leader, President Biden, is any kind of shoo-in. What you can say is, over and over, especially since the overturning of Roe, the public in places red, purple, blue, green, anywhere you go, keeps picking Democrats over the alternative. We have a new project that I also want to make sure people know about, your documentary, God and Country, which looks at this issue of Christian nationalism. We have a little bit of it. Let's take a look.
Christian nationalism uses Christianity as a means to an end, that end being some form of authoritarianism.
Being a Christian is about the values of inclusion. Christian nationalism is certainly not based on the values of the gospel.
God wants America to be saved. They're told over and over and over again that you're in danger.
You need to fight if you don't want to lose your country.
We are in a civil war.
We'll show you in the documentary. And by the way, there are very conservative Christian evangelicals, pastors, very respected people in the Christian community that are frightened of this Christian nationalist movement, because it's not they not only frightened about it hurting democracy, but Christianity itself. And we show in the film that this movement was the foundation for January 6th. They were the moving elements that made January 6th and the insurrection happen. And now we have a Speaker of the House who is an avowed Christian nationalist. He even says that the teachings of the Bible and what he believes, that whatever he believes God's will is, overtakes the Constitution, and that all decisions have to be made based on his thinking. So we have this now inculcated in our government, and Donald Trump is more than happy to be their mouthpiece. And we see this connection, and it's brought out in the film, and it's very scary because there's the possibility, and we talk about it in the film, that we could slip into an autocracy very easily. You hear this all the time, and on your show and many other shows, that the fight right now is between whether or not we preserve our democracy or we slip into a theocratic autocracy. That's what this movement wants. They believe that this is a white Christian nation. That's what it should be. And that's what we bring out in the film. And they're not only poisoning the democracy, they're also poisoning Christianity.
And so I'm curious, from your time studying this and doing the project, what you think about the zealotry and the extremism of that belief that makes it more theocratic, that makes you think you have the truth. You know, my dad reminded me the other day of this Václav Havel quote, surround yourself with people seeking the truth not those who think they already found it, which is a way of saying if somebody has a full monopoly on the truth, religious, scientific, or otherwise, you know, you got to take a beat. And so it looks like you're about to respond. So I won't finish the question. You take it from here.
Yeah, no, I mean, the point is, this is not a religious movement. This is a movement, a political movement. It's a movement for power.